This is a test, this is a test, this is a test. Good morning. We hope everyone had a Merry Christmas. Oh, Lord. Good morning and welcome to the Thursday edition of the weekly briefing for Central North Carolina. This period covers December 26th through January 1st, 2020. We hope everyone had a Merry Christmas. Certainly the weather was very pleasant, especially if you enjoy mild temperatures that we saw yesterday and Christmas Eve. As we go through this briefing, you'll see that the weather expected over the next several days is pretty tranquil, so it should continue to be relatively quiet. High pressure is in control today, and that high pressure is expected to remain in control through at least the first half of Saturday. Then as we get into late Saturday and into Sunday, a cold front approaching from the west is going to bring our next chance of rain. And then that cold front is expected to exit the area on Monday with dry conditions to close the 2019 and to start 2020. And then it looks like our next system, there's a lot of uncertainty at this time, but our next system looks like it will potentially approach us as early as Wednesday night, but most likely Thursday and into Friday. If we look at our thunderstorm potential over the next 3 days, with high pressure being in control, as I mentioned earlier, it's not a surprise to see there's no thunder chances across our region. Looking at rainfall totals, notice we start seeing the greens and the blues start to increase on Saturday. Again, that would be very late, mostly Saturday night, with the better chances expected on Sunday night. Right now, one of the trends we've been observing in the models over the last 24 hours is we're expecting a fairly organized area of showers moving into the mountains, and then as those showers spread east off the mountains and across our area, a lot of the guidance is showing a pretty noticeable weakening trend. So right now it looks like the better rainfall amounts are going to be reserved for western parts of the state, with rainfall amounts dropping off west to east. So right now we're forecasting rainfall amounts to range between 1/4 to 1/2 inch, with those highest amounts across the triad. And again, that system that looks like it's going to approach mid to late week will probably slow down and not come into the area through Thursday or Friday. So we'll continue to monitor that late week system. Looking ahead at our winter weather potential for the next few days, it's not surprising given the mild temperatures. Actually it looks like it's across most of the United States. The mild air is dominating. So there's not really, other than the Rockies, the chance for winter precip. So that continues to stay quiet. One of the questions we've been getting is where's the cold air and when is it going to turn cold? And so crafted up these two slides to try to talk about what drives the cold air. And you've heard this term. It became really popular the last couple of years, but it's not a new phenomenon. It's always been there. It's what we call the polar vortex, or basically the polar low. The polar low is basically a permanent feature that sits over the poles. And what we look for these two different phases. There's what we call the positive phase, and in that positive phase, that means that Arctic polar low is very strong. And so when it's strong, the jet stream's strong, and it keeps all the cold air bottled up over the polar regions. And as you go south over the northern hemisphere and over us, we generally see very mild temperatures. But when that polar vortex, that polar low starts to weaken, you start to see the jet stream weaken. And when the jet stream weakens, you start seeing the jet stream starting to buckle. That's what we call those dips in that jet stream. That's what brings us the cold air. And that's where the storms right along is the interaction of that jet stream and that cold and warm air. So when we see the polar vortex weaken, that's actually what brings us the cold temperatures. So now if we go and we look at this chart, so NOAA we chart the polar vortex by using what we call this Arctic oscillation. And while the polar vortex is this upper stratospheric phenomenon, we can measure it at the surface by looking at the differences in air pressure that's associated with the jet stream and with that vortex in the cold air. And so remember, if you go back to this graphic, we're looking for those positive phases and those negative phases. So if we look at this chart, you can see that in November and basically in mid-November and early November, we actually had that negative phase, and it was definitely a chilly end to November and a chilly start to December. But then we saw, or looking here, you see that we got into that positive phase in December, and then it dipped back down in mid-December, and now we've seen it become strongly positive. So, that's the explanation for why we're seeing all of the, very mild temperatures that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. And so if you start seeing where those lines become red, that's the forecast by what we call the ensemble members. And you can see that there's a good clustering to where we are right now, where it's strongly positive, and so we're mild. And if you look ahead for the next couple of weeks in January, because basically, what we've realized is we can forecast the Arctic oscillation pretty well out to 2 weeks, and then the skill really drops off. But even if you go forward over the next 2 weeks, it looks like we're going to remain in that positive phase. So right now, it doesn't look like we're going to see a good chance to see that cold air, which is what we need first to get any winter weather. So we'll look and we'll monitor how this ends up verifying. One thing we've noticed is that when this does, you look back, you can go back to September, you see it oscillates back and forth. So eventually, we're going to get into a negative phase, and that's when we'll most likely see our first chance for winter weather, which could line up being towards late January and early February, which is usually our most climatologically favored period time for snow. Okay, so getting back to the summary, we're expecting mild temperatures through this period all the way through New Year's Day and potentially through the first half of January. If the current forecast for the Arctic oscillation verify. Dry conditions will continue through Saturday, so we implore everybody to get out there and enjoy this mild and dry conditions. A cold front approaching from the west late Saturday night will bring our best chance of rain for the next several days, with that peak time being on Sunday and Sunday night. Rainfall amounts look to be between 1/4 to 1/2 inch, with the highest across the triad. That front will exit the area on Monday, bringing dry conditions to close 2019 and to start 2020. And then the next weather system looks like it will impact us starting probably at least on Thursday. So, well, that's going to be it. We hope everyone continues to have a very enjoyable and merry and close ending to 2019.